Welcome to Buckeye Turf Podcast. My name is Carl Danneberger, Professor of Turfgrass Science at The Ohio State University. This is the second podcast in a three-part series on heat stress. Temperature stress occurs when plants are exposed to temperatures outside their optimum for growth and development. In addition to heat stress, two other major temperature stresses, freeze and chilling, can occur. In general terms, a stress subjects a turfgrass plant to a hardship. These stresses can cause an indirect or direct strain or injury, resulting in a physical or metabolic change in the plant. Plant resistance to temperature stress, and for that matter any abiotic stress, is comprised of three components. Evasion is where the plant is not present at the time of the stress. This would be the case for many annual weeds. For example, the true annual form of Poa annua produces seed in the spring, then dies prior to the summer stress period. From a management perspective, having your turf die prior to a stress is not an acceptable means of stress resistance or stress management. Avoidance is the primary means a turf survives a stress. For example, a turf may not be exposed to a lethal cold temperature because it is under a blanket of snow, avoiding direct exposure to this temperature. Turf grasses may avoid moisture stress by having a deeper or more extensive root system, as another example. They may also avoid high temperature stress by the presence of wind, which would enhance transpiration, a deep root system, or the turf has a more northerly orientation. This list is just an example of how a plant can avoid a stress. Tolerance is the internal mechanisms by which a plant protects itself from a direct stress. Listed here are a few examples. The severity of a stress is determined by the duration, number of exposures, and the presence of multiple stresses. The impact of heat stress on cool season turf grasses will be the focus of our discussion. Heat stress in combination with other stresses can cause injury to warm season turf grasses. However, the occurrence is not as common as on cool season turf grasses. Cool season turf grasses have moderate tolerance to heat stress. Heat stress often occurs in conjunction with moisture stress. The most common heat stress symptoms are a reduction in shoot growth and a stoppage or loss of a functional root system. In most cases, heat stress alone does not cause turf death. The impact of heat often is associated with detrimental changes in plant growth and development, like producing thin, spindly plants that might be susceptible to stresses of wear and traffic, or moisture stress, or a combination of management practices that are detrimental under high temperatures, but may not necessarily be detrimental under optimum temperatures for growth. Two types of heat stress can occur. Indirect or chronic high temperature stress is the most prevalent. Temperatures above the optimum can result in a decline in turf growth and a loss of energy in the plant through a reduction of carbohydrate levels, and an indirect heat stress can also cause root loss or death. Direct or acute temperature stress occurs at supraoptimal temperatures that are lethal to the plant through the disruption of cellular functions. Soil temperatures above the optimum are more detrimental than air temperature. When average daily soil temperatures exceed 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% or more of the root system of a cool season turf grass can be lost. This was demonstrated in a controlled study at Rutgers University. The researchers exposed creeping bentgrass plants to increasing soil temperatures while holding the air temperature constant at 20 degrees centigrade, or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Above 21 degrees centigrade, they observed a decline in root mass, length, and activity, which continued to decline with increasing soil temperature. In field studies at The Ohio State University, where root growth was measured using an underground root observatory called a rhizotron, a decline in root elongation occurred when soil temperatures exceeded 20 degrees centigrade, as did root mass in a later study with creeping bentgrass cultivars maintained under putting green conditions. Indirect temperature stress, as previously mentioned, is a primary heat stress turf grasses face. However, with increased pressure to deliver quality turf surfaces, the potential for turf grass plants to be exposed to direct or acute stress increases under intensive management practices. Direct temperature stress causes injury to cell membranes and proteins. Turfgrass plants do have internal means of surviving a direct high temperature stress. One way to look at direct temperature stress is to ask the question, how do plants survive a lethal temperature? In a series of studies at The Ohio State University, we looked at the response of turfgrass plants to lethal temperatures. In this study, perennial ryegrass seedlings were exposed to a series of treatments. The two seedlings to the left were grown at a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days. Notice the relative good shoot and root growth. The two seedlings on the right were grown at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but on the third day were exposed to a 1-hour treatment of 131 degrees Fahrenheit. After this treatment, they were returned to 72 degrees Fahrenheit for the duration of the study. These seedlings were killed by that 1-hour treatment. The middle two seedlings were grown at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but before receiving a 2-hour exposure to 131 degrees Fahrenheit, on the third day they were given a 1-hour acclimation prior to the 131 degrees at 99 degrees Fahrenheit. The seedlings experienced a reduction in shoot and root growth compared to the control, but were alive even with the twice the exposure time at 131 degrees Fahrenheit as the two seedlings on the right. In a similar study, we looked at protein levels within perennial ryegrass plants subjected to similar temperature treatments as described previously. In this case, the two lanes to the left were perennial ryegrass plants grown at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Notice how dark the lanes are. The darkness is a result of various types and amounts of proteins that have formed. In the two far right lanes, these plants were grown at 82 degrees Fahrenheit too, but they were subjected to 2-hour heat treatment at 131 degrees Fahrenheit, again on the third or fourth day. Notice how the lanes are devoid of protein. These plants are dead. Now look at the two lanes labeled 40/55, where the plants receive 40 degrees centigrade or 104 degree Fahrenheit acclimation prior to the 55 or 131 degree Fahrenheit treatment. The lanes have lower levels of protein, yet they are still alive. In the two lanes labeled 40 for 40 degrees centigrade or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, notice that at this temperature we observed the presence of a protein that was not present at the 28 degrees centigrade treatment. This protein is part of a group of proteins known as heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins are both high and molecular weight proteins, as shown by the arrows. These proteins form during the acclimation phase, helping to stabilize other plant proteins and preventing them from unwinding once exposed to high temperatures. Once the high temperature stress subsides, these heat shock proteins degrade or disappear. The presence of heat shock proteins or classes of heat shock proteins may help determine the heat tolerance of turf grasses. At Mississippi State University, researchers determined that heat shock response in Pencross creeping bentgrass. Pencross is derived from 3 parents shown in the top photograph. The 3 bottom photos will represent the 3 parents. The black dots represent heat shock proteins. Notice the middle photograph or parent lacks some of the proteins. This might explain why Pencross is not as heat tolerant as some of the newer creeping bentgrass cultivars. Heat shock proteins may play an important role in direct temperature stress. However, other factors may be important. More research is needed into the molecular aspects of heat tolerance in turf grasses. What can we do to minimize turf injury during periods of heat stress? That will be discussed in the next podcast.